Well, we reached 100 subscribers. I didn't think this day would come, to be honest, but here we are. Today, I thought I'd share with you the way I became interested in vintage computers. I'm not as old as your average vintage computer collector, so it might seem strange for someone of my age to be interested in this topic. But today I'll share with you how I started collecting vintage computers. Let's get started. Sometime back in mid-2016, I had found a box of stuff. And in that box of stuff, I happened to find a copy of F-29 Retaliator. At first I was intrigued and unsure if it was a board game or something of that sort. Upon closer inspection though, I deemed that it was a computer game of some sort, but I was still unsure as to what it could be for. After all, it didn't look like a modern computer game. Must have been an old one. I researched it a bit and determined that it went to an IBM PC. So there must have been an IBM PC somewhere. So I went looking. Enjoy this recreation of how I found the IBM PC. I was having a good look around when all of a sudden I see something beige. A beige computer is what it looks like. I move a bit of rubbish out of the way and see more of it, and it is a beige computer indeed. Well, yeah, I'd found the IBM computer that went to that game. I later learned that it was a 386SX. I found a matching keyboard which seemed to fit the PS2 ports in the back. And I didn't actually have a mouse at the time, but I managed to find one a few days later. Once I found all the matching peripherals, I decided it was time to fire it up and see if this even was a computer. You gotta remember, at this time I wasn't even sure about vintage computers. In fact, I hadn't even thought of what would have come before Windows XP. I never really thought about it. When I saw this error at first, I thought the computer was dead, but it was just a bad CMOS battery, so yeah. Still haven't got around to changing that though. Anyway, once we get past this bad CMOS, believe it or not, the computer actually booted right into Windows 3.11. I was shocked. I'd read things about hard drives going bad, but still, I wasn't sure about any of this. I soon determined that this F-29 Retaliator game went in the floppy drive, which was on the front of the machine. I never really found DOS too hard, as I had prior experience with batch coding, but there were some new commands to learn. Sure enough, the game booted right up. There I had it. F-29 Retaliator was going. I was so excited to play this vintage computer game. At this point, I'd already researched other games like Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. Boy did I know though, they would not run on this 386SX. Anyway, we had F-29 Retaliator going. This was awesome. At first I was really confused as to what this meant, but then I figured out you gotta look in the manual, and it's a form of copy protection. I found this really funny, to be honest. After skimming through the manual a little more, I managed to find the code that I needed to enter to play the game. This was it. I was finally going to play this awesome vintage computer game. If only I knew. Anyway, so once I put in Sector F8, another screen appeared. Wow, this was pixelated, and I loved it. I found it really cool. After navigating through the menus a bit more, I started the game. I saw past these terrible graphics and was just in shock that they had games 30 years ago. I'd never even heard of Windows 95 or 98. Little did I know there was Windows 3.1. But yeah, I was playing this game finally. I saw past its flaws and looked at its features. This is what people played. It wasn't like the modern games. It was really interesting and different. And Each game was very unique, unlike today, where the market is dominated by first-person shooters. I liked this game, but I was keen to try more. I soon ordered one of those USB floppy drives, as I figured that all the games could be put on floppy disks. And I was right. This was the first way I transferred files to vintage computers. I thought I was a genius at the time. Little did I know how many better methods there are. But for this 386, I still just do that, because most of the files aren't big that you need to put on it. I copied a lot of shareware games and had a blast playing some games like Dangerous Dave, shown here. At the time, I didn't really care about the bad graphics. In fact, I liked the whole style. I didn't think the machine was limited to this, I just thought this was the style at the time. But boy was I wrong. In these games, the main thing was that I was having a lot of fun. But still, in the back of my mind, I was keen to try games that I had heard about, like Doom. One time, I tried copying Doom to this computer, and there was actually a power outage in the middle of the copying, and it didn't even work in the end. So, it was a big waste of time. But that's how you learn, I guess. But I was keen to find a better vintage computer that could play Doom and all these games I wanted to play. After a while, I got tired of the 386 and kind of just put it away and forgot about vintage computing forever. I moved on to other interests, like vintage game consoles, which I found really cool because I primarily wanted to play games at this time, old ones. After about 2 years from initially using the PS1, I found some other vintage computers, and my interest was reignited. Some family members were throwing them away, so this was my opportunity. There was a Socket 7 Pentium 200 MMX machine, and a compact Pentium 3 machine. I kind of didn't think much of the Socket 7 machine, so I put it away for another day. After all, I wanted all the power I could get, and I'd heard good things about Pentium 3 systems, so I focused all my attention on this little compact Desk Pro. This machine worked great, and I could finally play all the games I wanted to play. There was only one problem though. The CD drive was dead, so there was no point in collecting physical media to play on this machine. What I ended up doing was using a USB stick, and that's how I transferred all the games to this machine. It actually worked really well, but I was power hungry for something with an AGP slot. At the time, I dreamed about owning something like a Voodoo 5 or a Voodoo 3, a 3D accelerator. I mean, this machine had an ATI Rage 3D chip in it, which was honestly pretty good, but I had heard a lot about 3DFX, and I was really interested in them at the time. But nonetheless, I made the most out of this machine. In total, I've probably spent over 100 hours using this machine, just in spare time, messing around with MIDI files and programming, and also some games. I did a lot of batch programming on this machine, and I found it really fascinating. I really like batch, as it forces you to be creative and work with ASCII only. There was no graphics with batch, and its limitations are actually really cool for things like game development. I actually developed an entire game for batch once, and it was really good. So yeah, be creative with batch. Don't doubt its limitations. Gosh, I really do have some good memories with this computer though. Even though I don't primarily use it anymore, I still cherish it and really enjoy it. I had saved up some money at the time and decided it was finally time to build my own vintage computer from scratch. I was going to make something that could handle anything. It would be awesome. It would have an AGP port and more. I was really set on AGP ports at the time. Well, what I ended up buying probably wasn't the best in hindsight. In fact, it was pretty bad. But it taught me a lot of fundamentals about building computers. You gotta remember, this was the first computer I ever built. Now, what I ended up getting was a Socket 370 board, which I thought was golden, and it also had an AGP port, which I also thought was incredible. But the problem was, this motherboard had the 440LX chipset, which meant that it only supported CPUs with a 66MHz frontside bus speed. So this limited me to using a Celeron or Celery processor. This wasn't a limitation at the time though, and I was still able to run all my favourite games like Half-Life and Quake 2. I finally had a machine that had a working CD-ROM drive, played all the games I wanted it to, and did it well enough. I was content. Well, I've since found better computers from a variety of places, which do the jobs I need them to do really well. And I don't just play games anymore. I'm really interested in networking and a lot of other topics surrounding vintage computers. I have no shortage of projects on hand, so expect to see a lot more in the future. I also collect the games too. I don't really collect many big box games, as they're quite hard to find and really expensive, but I have no shortage of CDs, and these are some top shelf games right here. Well, we've about caught up to where I am with vintage computing today. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and don't intend on stopping anytime soon. I hope you enjoyed this brief history video, and I'll see you next time.